Well, this isn't what I expected. You know, that Christmas gift that you've so carefully chosen. And there you are, Christmas morning, and your beloved opens it, and you're both surprised. Because it is much different from the picture on the internet. Oh, honey, this isn't what I expected. Or that child that you have so carefully raised chooses a life partner quite different from the person you envisioned. Oh, this isn't what I expected. Or sometimes the partner that you have chosen becomes another person than you thought you knew. This isn't what I expected. It can be so hard when the unexpected occurs. You feel irked or maybe confused, sometimes even defeated, the wind knocked out of us. Because what we've counted on will not come to pass after all. And even if the unexpected thing is good news, we're still left needing some time to adjust, aren't we? To let the pieces all settle. Like when a child's kaleidoscope lens is twisted anew and it takes a moment for those glass pieces to move into place, for a new pattern to emerge. I think Mary and Elizabeth both must have said, "This is not what I expected." You're a young engaged woman, pregnant. You are an older woman who's lived a full life already, pregnant. What did these women do? What do we do when what happens is not at all what we've expected? Often we in the church suggest and maybe even applaud a certain docility in Mary and Elizabeth. We say, oh, look at how wonderfully they passively accepted this utterly unexpected new life. And of course, there was this instant delight they felt. You know, we have quiet maternal scenes that emerge immediately, we think. Both women were overjoyed with their new unexpected status. But actually, what we're told in the Bible is that Elizabeth went into seclusion for 5 months. She didn't tell anybody what was happening. Even her cousin Mary didn't know. And today we learn Mary's reaction. It was to hit the road, and quickly, after her encounter with that angel. Mary left, we're told, with haste. She set out. There was some intentionality to this. She took what was likely a several-day hike out into the rural hill country to see her cousin Elizabeth, who was also unexpectedly pregnant. And it makes sense, doesn't it? A young engaged girl will become pregnant, so of course she's going to leave home and goes far away. For some time, at least, to sort things out away from her mother, away from Joseph, away from all those inquiring neighbors. She rushes, goes with haste off to, well, a safe place, to an older woman who is not her mother, who apparently may now have special insight about these odd happenings. A woman who herself is trying to adjust to something she never expected to happen. Elizabeth is someone else for whom the kaleidoscope of life has been shaken and the pieces tossed and turned into another pattern altogether. She goes with haste. I wonder, does Mary walk briskly to get those endorphins flowing and maybe some perspective back? Does she rush because actually the more she thinks about it, that whole cycle of emotions any of us would feel comes along her and she gets anxious or maybe even enraged? Sweating makes those feelings feel such a relief with all those feelings. Or does she just need time away, alone? When we take those hikes and just stare out into nature, the rhythm of just one foot in front of the other. It's not easy for any of us to adjust to life when we're thinking over and over, I never expected this. I relate to it. Do you? We all know those broad categories of conservative or liberal, those who prefer to conserve the good already in place, and those more willing to press for change, hoping for improvements ahead. And it's no surprise to all of you that I'm probably in that latter category. At my best, I yearn for God's transformation in my personal life and in our world. But of course, another part of me, too, is fairly jostled when suddenly I face the unexpected. Partly that human desire to control things, but it's also a penchant for some warning, some foreknowledge. And that's a different thing. Even for those of us who tend to lean into change, it's awfully nice to get a heads up. In faith language, it takes a deep trust in God to greet that unexpected with joy and peace and hope. Those are the words of our first 3 candles in Advent: joy and peace and hope. One might say, perhaps, it takes a deep trust in that 4th Advent word that we heard today, 4th Sunday of Advent. It's the word love. To greet unexpected news with something like hope or peace or joy, doesn't it take confidence that God's love will never, ever leave us, whatever the new circumstances? And the words of one of my very favorite verses when I was a child: "Lo, I will be with you always, even until the end of the age." Or what about that verse from St. Paul where he says, nothing will ever separate you from the love of God. In the Psalms that Mary may well have known, God's steadfast love endures forever. I wonder if this is what we're seeing in Mary. For whatever propelled her out the door of her home initially, by the time Mary arrives, there's this palpable joy that seems to be in the room. That Holy Spirit is filling everyone, we're told. It's filled Elizabeth, the babies even in utero, and Mary herself, she's about to launch into the Magnificat, the glorious song of praise to a God who turns everything upside down, defying the world's expectations of how things should be. With this new baby, this odd kind of Messiah of love, in time the whole world is going to be saying, oh, this is not what we expected. And you hear Elizabeth shouting out. When Mary is faced with something utterly expected in her life, Mary is trusting that God will fulfill this promise, that the Lord is with her. Remember that from which some of you may have said is the Hail Mary, the Lord is with you. That's what Mary's heard. The Lord is with her, not just at some time of conception, but that the Holy Spirit will continue to come upon her. Mary, of course, has none of the specifics of how things will evolve, but it seems that she's trusting enough as she arrives with Elizabeth, that God's love will be present with her. And Elizabeth shouts it out, "Blessed is she who believes that there would be fulfillment of what was spoken to her." Mary, girl, you amaze me. You got a crazy promise for God, and you're trusting God's love. This isn't what I expected. That's what Tracy Lind says she thought when she was diagnosed with early onset dementia 2 years ago at age 62, my age now. Emily, Tracy's wife of 20 years, said, "I had dreamed of us walking down the street to visit neighbors after Tracy retired. I had never dreamed of this." I know parts of Emily and Tracy's story because I met Tracy 2 summers ago at an outdoor Episcopal church in Wellfleet. It's where I worshiped for many years, and when I'm at Cape Cod. For nearly 2 decades, I've climbed up that hill to St. James the Fisherman, sat on the simple wooden benches, being blessed by gifted preaching and by the simple, warm fellowship. Every coffee hour, we have red punch and Oreos. Now, Tracy had only recently become our summer chaplain. Her winter gig was as dean of the cathedral in Cleveland, where she has been a powerful civic and interfaith leader. The summer I met her 2 years ago, she and I went out on the beach for a walk, that luminary minister giving me, a new minister, some needed advice. And at the end of our conversation, I was startled by her sharing that there was something wrong with her mind. She was startled, she'd even told me, asked for my confidence, and I held it in my heart. Later that fall, Tracy got her diagnosis after many, many tests. And it was this early onset dementia. She was told by her neurologist to quit her job, get her affairs in order. She would die sooner than she had expected. Now, partly Tracy says she felt relief that now she knew what was happening, and it was confirmed that she wasn't making it up. But of course, the second part of Tracy was deeply grief-stricken. Her career was being cut short, her brain was shrinking, her finances were now uncertain, her life was likely to end earlier. And the third part of her reaction, Tracy says she wanted to escape. Get me out of here. She wanted to set out with haste, to go out into the hillside towns far away. During the time of adjustment and discernment that followed, Tracy realized that she could still preach and teach now, but she no longer could organize her large staff or vision new plans for the cathedral's future. Her executive functioning was failing. So Tracy courageously and honestly spoke about her diagnosis and resigned as dean of the cathedral in Cleveland. And then she and Emily got out of Dodge. She took some Jack Kerouac-type road trip, she said. And then a friend who was a priest in Paris invited her to come for Easter. Paris, Easter, why not? And maybe, said the friend, take a cruise. A cruise? Well, it turns out that cruise ships twice a year need to switch their locations. Relocating, let's say, from the Caribbean in the winter to the Mediterranean in the summer, and they don't want to sail empty. So for a price less than a plane ticket to Paris, Emily and Tracy took a 14-day cruise to Europe in one of its repositioning routes. Tracy says she was angry, but not at God. She didn't think God had caused this. She chalks up the disease to bad family genetics and the environment, but she really was not sure where God was in the midst of it. She was still trying to figure it out, finding where the shattered pieces of glass of her life and the kaleidoscope were going to land. Could she see a new pattern? Could it also be beautiful? For most of the 2-week voyage across the Atlantic, Tracy slept and read and ate, and she tried to grasp what was happening to her. The last few days of the cruise fell in Holy Week, and then she said, I swear this is true. It was midnight on Maundy, Thursday, and the boat was passing through the Straits of Gibraltar between two continents, Africa and Europe, and I was looking up at the night sky. It was the first full moon since the spring solstice. And Tracy says, I felt a shift, a repositioning within herself. She could either view her diagnosis as a death sentence or as a pilgrimage. And she chose the latter. 3 days later, when her friend in Paris bid the Easter people in the church nave to rise and proclaim the resurrection, Tracy felt herself rise too, new life within her. Slowly, since then, Tracy and Emily have made themselves available for teaching and preaching together, sharing about the spiritual part of their journey through dementia. Last summer, when I saw her, Tracy said she would love to come here, to be with us at King's Chapel, and I hope that we can do that, offering her gifts to our wider community. Because Tracy now is trying to live within herself all those lessons that she preached for decades. These are the closing words I transcribed from her talk at a church in Charlotte, North Carolina earlier this year. Quote, for 30 years I have preached that out of pain comes joy, out of brokenness comes wholeness, out of death comes new life. I am bound and determined to live that now in myself. And I encourage you, she said, to do the same thing. Take the interruptions and intrusions in your life, all those unexpected things, and turn them into invitations. Take what might seem on the outside to be death sentences and make them into pilgrimage. Live that way with one another. She continues, I can't manage a big staff anymore and run around the way I used to, but God has said, I'll help you figure this out. God does that with all of us, whatever life deals us. And I am convinced, she ended, that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Amen.